Hey guys, and welcome back. My name is Jessica Leichtweisz, and I'm the CEO of Hope Education Services. I started this show, Bridge the Gap, last year because I wanted to really have honest and open conversations with adults with autism to learn more about what autism is, what it feels like, what it looks like, and what professionals are doing right and how we can be better professionals and what we're doing wrong. So tonight I'm really excited to bring my friend's daughter on this show today. She's amazing. She has two brothers with autism. She's 19 years old. She's diagnosed with Asperger syndrome. She's working two jobs, and she has a really powerful message to share. So I really want to welcome you, Heather Brandon. Welcome to the call today, and thanks for coming on.
Hi, thank you for having me.
Yeah, my pleasure. So you and I have something in common. We have a love for dogs, a love for animals. So I have one dog, two bunnies. You have two dogs and two brothers, right?
Two brothers.
Two brothers. So what is that like?
Hectic. Having to trips are definitely a challenge.
Yeah. So no, you are diagnosed right with Asperger syndrome, and your brothers are both diagnosed with autism, correct? So they have a little bit more severity and symptoms, or like a little more challenges than you have. Is that correct? So
That
what?
is very correct.
Yeah. So why don't you tell me a little bit about you and a little bit about your family dynamics and really being, a sibling of two brothers, but in all of you are on the spectrum, but in different areas of the spectrum. I think you're more qualified than anyone to share a little bit about what that looks like with the audience.
Well, it's very kind of difficult because they're both varying degrees of independence. I mean, one of them needs help doing a lot of things that a child could learn, needs to know. And I learned that around the same time that normal kids did because I wanted to help with the family because they needed attention more than me. And I kind of wanted to be more of a help to the family. So I guess I could say I grew up faster than normal kids. Um, my brothers were both diagnosed with autism very young. I was diagnosed later, so I guess you could say they had more attention and more care when they were younger and when I was older. So I guess you'd say I got less attention as I was younger. Um, yeah.
Yeah. And how old are your brothers? Just so we have some context for this.
One of them is 17 and the other's 13. Uh, the older one was diagnosed when he was 2, and the younger one was diagnosed when he was 3, I believe.
Okay. So you weren't diagnosed yet when your brothers were diagnosed, correct?
I was diagnosed about a year later when the older one was diagnosed. I was around 8.
So what was that like for you when you found out your brothers had autism? Like, what were you thinking and feeling?
Well, I kind of already knew that they were different. Pretty much, I grew up, my first memories of them, they were different. They were not like normal boys that I knew at school. But I kind of realized that I also was different because I couldn't understand how some people's thought processes were, or why they thought some things were okay and why to do certain things when I had no idea why these things happened.
So what are some of the things for you? Because I know that there's a lot of parents who watch this show, and a lot of them have young children with autism, and their children do think differently, and they do things differently. But they're unfortunately a lot of times because of their age, or maybe because they're non-vocal, they're not talking yet. They can't tell their parents what they're thinking or feeling that's different. Parents can just look at them and see that they're doing different things. But a big part of this show, Bridge the Gap, what it's about is bringing on adults with autism who can do a better job than I can as a professional with sharing with parents, what's going on behind the scenes. Like everyone always says, parents say, I wish I can get in my kid's head. And I think that like vicariously through you and through the other adults with autism I brought on the show, parents are getting the chance to do that. So, what is it for you as a child that was like you're thinking about when you're looking at your peers that made you think, okay, well, I don't understand this?
Well, one of the big things was how did kids like Hannah Montana? They loved her, but I thought she was as annoying as crazy, and everybody thought I was very weird for thinking that, and actually got some silent treatment from that. Um, I liked to walk around the track, but no one usually wanted to come up to me and say hi. Other times when there would be parent-teacher, family parties and such. My mom would be taking care of my brothers or going to help my brothers with doctor's appointment or work, so I would not have a parent with me at the time. So I kind of really didn't know how to talk to kids who already had their parents with them. So then no one really wanted to talk to me anyway. Didn't really have anyone really to speak to. So I guess I just walked off and stood in the corner, but felt that just very lonely.
Yeah, and I think that's one of the hardest things, like for teachers, for myself, like working with kids and seeing that there are some kids that are isolated and bullied. And you know, I'm open and honest in this show. This is about really raw conversations. I was bullied a lot as a kid too, and I don't have any diagnosis, but I had a really hard time connecting with kids. You know, for me, like you, I didn't share the same interests as a lot of other kids. And so I felt like it was really hard to develop friendships. And it does get really lonely and it does get really painful. You know, for you, is bullying a problem when you were a child?
It was more of isolation. No one really wanted to talk to me. It wasn't that they bullied me, they just didn't talk. They wouldn't converse with me. After a while, when I changed schools to a private school, people started talking to me after about a year after I was there, and I didn't know why they were. And I finally, when we were doing a little socializing session together, pretty much bringing awareness to mental health, they said that you were very quiet when you first got here, and I said, really? And he said, you felt very cold. You looked like a very cold person. You looked very distant and didn't want to talk to us. And I thought that was completely the opposite. I had no idea why they would think that.
Yeah, and that's really like a hard thing, right? Is because sometimes you really, really want something. You know, part of a diagnosis of autism is the way that people typically communicate visually. Sometimes for people with autism, they have a hard time doing that or understanding that. So stuff that might come natural to someone who's not on the spectrum, it doesn't come natural to someone on the spectrum. So there's this perception that the person doesn't want to talk or doesn't want to communicate because they're not doing it in the exact same way that other people might be doing it. That doesn't mean that they don't want to talk, they don't want to communicate. It's just doing it in their own way. You know, one of my favorite quotes in the field of autism is that just because someone can't talk doesn't mean they have nothing to say. And I think that you can translate that into your case is just because someone may be communicating or initiating friendship or initiating socialization differently doesn't mean they don't want it. It just may look differently. You know, so for someone who is watching this show, for two parts, we have people watching this show of people who have autism, and some of them are teenagers, and they might be going through the very thing you're going through. So let's address that first. You know, I know for a fact I have a friend. She has two sons that have autism. They're both teenagers, and they both watch this show. You know, and they're experiencing that. So, what advice would you give them, both on how to cope with it emotionally, and then also just things they can do to prevent them from having that same kind of tragedy, I would say, of like having years of isolation when people did want to talk to them and they did want to talk to people and there just was a disconnection.
I would say follow their passionate interests. I mean, my interest became reading. I loved stories. So I would say join a club that actually matches your interests. If the people there don't like you, make your own club and just put out flyers and just talk with other people. I mean, I actually really didn't fully understand that I have autism when till I started communicating with people on Facebook, and pretty much they just sounded just like me. And before, just communicating with other people like you, speaking with other people that think like you feels a lot more comforting than and gets you more into working together.
Yeah, and that's like your big reason why I started this show. So when I started working with children with autism, it was in 2008. So in 2008, an adult would have been born in 1996. So in 1996, autism was believed to have been around 1 in 1,000. So there also, like Facebook, obviously in 1996, it didn't exist. And so it did in 2004, but it was still for college kids. But essentially, when I first started working with kids with autism, there really was no unified community of adults with autism. So that's something that's new. And it's something that I think one of the really good benefits of social media. I know a lot of people complain that social media has changed everything and people are, talking on the phone less and meeting less. But I think that in many ways, it's made the world much more connected. And it's certainly made this community of adults with autism come together. And I think we've seen powerful connections being born. People who, didn't even know they had autism, because a big thing, right, with the rise in numbers of autism is that the stigma was different 20 years ago. There was a really kind of thought and a belief that if a person had autism, it just meant they couldn't talk or that they had cognitive challenges. We know that's not the case. There's this big spectrum, right, of different abilities. People came together and unified as a community, and it's been really, really powerful. So, what do you think of this idea? And this is actually the first time I've asked anyone on this show this question, but how do you feel about the idea of a professional coming together and just asking and interviewing adults with autism? And I talk about one of the things that sets me apart from other professionals is that I incorporate the feedback of adults with autism in my treatment plans to make sure, if I'm working with a child and I'm talking to them about eating properly in restaurants and they like to eat a specific way that maybe doesn't look right to me or might not socially look appropriate, I've asked adults the question is like, do you think I should have him eat the right way or should I let him do it his way? What's the, what is it going to cost him if I don't teach him this? And what is it going to cost him to self-esteem if I kind of keep making this an issue? So what do you think about this idea for this show?
I think it's actually a very good idea because if there have been faults in parenting or actually learning how to grow as a person and with us as adults, it's a good way to teach the younger generation that it's not wrong to eat a certain way or don't feel pressured to be like other neurotypical kids because that's how everybody else is and that's how some parents want your kids to be.
Yeah, no, absolutely. So, I know you were diagnosed later in life, which is actually becoming more and more common as more awareness of autism exists. Did you have therapies as a child, or do you have any kind of services that you get now? I know your brothers do, but is that something that you received as a child?
I had speech therapy when I think I was around 3. Um, I had some therapies because I had some depression when I was a preteen and going on a teenager. The therapy never fully stuck. I mean, I would go to a couple sessions, but it would always fall on the railroad tracks. But pretty much, and I also had sensory therapy too. So,
Yeah, so sensory. So this is interesting. So I do believe in helping a person as a whole individual. So I come from a background of ABA, which stands for Applied Behavior Analysis. We study behavior. And so a lot of people who study behavior don't recognize sensory issues in people with autism, and they refuse to treat it. And I actually get a lot of messages. We talk about bullying. Well, I get a lot of cyberbullying from other professionals in the field of autism because I do talk about the sensory needs and sensory issues that people with autism have. And for me, if I see that an individual has a need and I'm working with that person, I make it my job to help them in all areas. And so sometimes for me, that means going outside of the conventional treatment, because if it's working for someone, I believe in doing it. And I think that, a person is not a textbook, a person is, not data, they're not a study, it's an individual with needs, and it's my job to help them meet their needs. So can you tell us a little bit about that sensory, like the sensory therapy, the sensory things that you're going through, kind of confirm for professionals who may be watching this, that just because it hasn't made it yet into the DSM, the statistical manuals or textbooks, just because it's not common knowledge yet, doesn't mean that it's not actually something that exists. So what are some of the sensory needs that you have or that you had as a child, or even that your family, your brothers have that you want to bring awareness to?
okay. When I was little, pretty much sensory stuff in my hands. I couldn't stand certain touches of clothing and such. I can't stand pretty much the sound of metal against cardboard, since metal surface or plastic surface, pretty much a normal table, anything like that. It feels like nails on a chalkboard. And also on certain times of day, I can't stand the sunlight. Pretty much, I feel like I'm squinting too much. It just feels like too bright. So I always wear sunglasses during the daytime. Just that happens every now and again that my eyes just feel too sensitive for the sunlight. My brothers, well, one of them sensory avoiding, the other sensory seeking. So the one that's sensory avoiding, he doesn't like loud sounds. He always wears headphones on his head, so everything's all muted for him. But he does. There's more than 3 people in a room, he'll go way upstairs and pretty much just where it's quieter because he can't stand the noise. While the other, he loves sensory, and pretty much when he was little, he would have 4 electronics all going at the same time, and you couldn't get him to turn off one of them because he just needed that sensory output. He even needs it to go to sleep.
So that must have been an interesting dynamic in your household, because you have one person who's seeking lots and lots of noise and seeking lots of stimulation, and you have another person living under the same roof who's avoiding lots of stimulation. So it sounds like you and your mom and your dad had a really kind of chaotic, hard time to live in.
Yes, they did not like each other at all when they were young. One would be running away from the other, and the other would be wondering, why is he running away? And just continue following it, and just it would go to a point where the other one couldn't take it anymore and go hide behind doors and such.
Yeah. So, you have probably like a big part of this spectrum in your household. Now, your brothers, obviously you're very like an eloquent speaker. Not only can you talk, but you can talk very well. You're very good at communicating. I've actually find you to be a more eloquent speaker than a lot of the professionals I've interviewed, and easy to interview and talk with. So um, that's something obviously. But so your brothers though, are they both vocal? Like, can they both talk to communicate? Do they have the same level of communication skills you have?
They can speak. Greg is getting there. He's learned to speak quite good. He doesn't like to have long conversations. His preferred method of communication is texting. While the other, he can talk. He's definitely good at conversation and such. Pretty much, if he doesn't know what to say, he'll repeat it back to you, or he'll just act like he heard what you said and not say anything. So a lot of times when he was in school, he would hear the information, but it would just go right through his ears. He didn't know what it meant. He just whoop, gone.
Yeah. And that's something I think that's really, I know, frustrating for parents. And, even a lot of times something as simple, if you say to a child, what's your name? Instead of saying their name, they'll say, what's your name? Right? They repeat it back. So we call that echolalia. And a lot of people think that means the child doesn't want to communicate, but oftentimes it's not. And like you said, in your case, it's not that you don't want to communicate. It's that they don't really know what to do or say or how to respond. So they're just doing the best they can.
Mm-hmm.
Awesome. So, going back to the therapies that you receive, and I know your brothers are receiving therapy, are there any situations that stick out to you of like really good therapists or people who've done a really good job in your, either with you or your brothers that you've been aware of?
Best therapy I could say was my brother's aide. His name's Lamar, pretty much, and he's been around with us for almost a year now. And before he came around, my brother would barely have any conversations with us. Actually, he would rarely ever talk to me, rarely talk to any of us at all. He would mostly hide up in his room. My other brother would hide up in his room too. They rarely came out of their rooms unless they absolutely had to. And he didn't know how to take care of himself. He didn't know how to put deodorant on, or didn't know how to keep putting deodorant on. Shaving, he didn't know how to shave. We tried to teach him. He didn't know how to do that either. He didn't know how to put dishes away or just clean the dishes off with water and such. What's another thing that he didn't know how to do? He didn't know how to clean things at all.
Well, some of that's just being a boy, right? We know boys.
Yeah,
Are
I mean, it was worse than before. My mom had to literally pick out his clothes for him. Had to tie his shoes even. He didn't know how to neither of my brothers know how to tie their shoes. Didn't know how to brush his teeth. My mom was literally reaching up and brushing his teeth for him. Um, he didn't we had to shave his arms and other areas that are not good. um, but after Lamar, he's actually almost he knows how to brush his teeth by himself. He knows not to swallow toothpaste. He knows to put deodorant on him. He knows that, well, he still doesn't know how to pick out his own clothes, but he knows to put on clothes and has some fashion sense now. He knows what clothes go on at certain times. He's knows now to put shoes on when he goes outside, because he'll go out on the street and go on his scooter and just go barefoot on the asphalt, which would really hurt me. Um, he now knows how to put his dishes away or close his mouth while chewing, because he would chew with mouth open a lot and we would tell him not to, and he would still do it regardless, which really annoyed me and was sensory killer for my ears. Um, However, he did learn how to do it. Let's see what else. He learned to communicate with my brother more. I mean, he would not talk to him at all. He now talks to us. He talks to us much more now.
Yeah. And you bring up some good points, because a lot of people think when they are talking about therapies for autism, they think about just like the basic things of, you think about ABA, and I know your brother receives ABA just because I'm friends with your mom, but
Yeah.
so people think about it's like for young kids, and it's teaching them to talk and teaching them to match cards or imitate, and you have these like videos of where people have two boxes and a ball, and each person has a ball, and you're teaching the kid to put the ball in the box, and people think that's what ABA is, but it's not. It's really just helping a child to gain the skills that they require to be successful. And at an older age, it might look like teaching them to shave or teaching them to eat and teaching them to communicate and have conversations. So you really shed some light on what some of the positive benefits of therapies are, that and what it looks like as a child gets older and becomes a teenager. Now, so you talked about having good therapy experiences. There's always good and there's always bad, right? And I think that in order to really examine what makes a good professional, what makes a professional who's trying hard but maybe missing the mark. But one of the things I always want to do, and one of the things I think that benefits me the most from even being on this show, is I get to be a better professional by asking what for you is really working, and what's not working, honestly. So have you had an experience with therapy either for you or for your brothers that you looked at and said, this is not a good experience? Because I really think examining what made Lamar a good therapist, and maybe this other person, we don't have to say names, but who maybe wasn't quite the best therapist, even if they had a good heart, they didn't really do the great job. None of us professionals want to be that person with good intentions who didn't do a good job. So have you had that experience?
Well, I haven't really spent a long time with therapists. I would get a couple sessions, but then it would just go away and we wouldn't really do much therapy. A really bad experience did not happen to me, but to my youngest brother. Pretty much the county assigned a therapist to him for the summer, and because they didn't believe he needed to go to a special school for him. And that therapist didn't even try hard, made him cry. I mean, we would go away for about 10 minutes and find him under the table crying. And just, I don't think he understood him. I think he was just used, it was a school therapist, school counselor therapist, and the therapist obviously acted like he was only used to kids who had been slightly bullied, or that they were just not as smart as other kids, or he just was used to kids who knew that they were doing wrong but did it anyway, and was trying to figure out how to get them to do right or actually do it the way social norms are. It just seemed he didn't understand at all what Reese had, or autism at all. I don't think he had ever experienced an autistic child at all, or if he had, he probably misdiagnosed him entirely or treated him horribly. I don't know. But we were with him for about a month, but we tried to make the sessions short, but every time Reese was not a happy camper at all. And we finally said, enough, this is hurting him more than helping him entirely, and said, We followed your ways, but we can't do it anymore.
Yeah. And, a lot of the trouble is that as a teacher, you might get a child with autism in your classroom, but you may not have ever been trained about autism and you may not know what it is. And even just teachers like music teachers or art teachers might have children or phys ed teachers in their rooms of kids with autism, and they may not have ever heard of it. They may not have had that experience before. So, for that person watching this, that's maybe a teacher or maybe just even if it's just someone a librarian, someone in the community, even if it's a cashier who works in a store and might experience having a customer that's a teenager with autism who's trying to make a purchase and maybe struggling, what would you tell them about autism? What do you think everybody needs to know in order to treat people the best way?
To have patience and to understand that they may not just be understanding what you're saying because you're saying in a way that neurotypicals understand, but you're not speaking it clearly enough for them to understand because we all live in a world where slang and code words are a thing and not I can't even understand slang words at times, and I have to get clarification many times to understand what people are saying. And for kids who have autism and teachers, just speaking clearly and speaking honestly and having patience with them, and when they get angry or get overloaded, stimulated, to have patience and let them relax, but don't single them out or make them wait in the hallway because they were making a fuss.
Yeah, and I think that I was almost going to close on that because I think giving patience is the best advice, and it's something every person has said. But you talked real quick, and I wanted to talk about this before we close about when someone's having a meltdown or you said making a fuss, but if someone's having a meltdown, that oftentimes people with autism have a really hard time coping with something, and so it may look like they're having a tantrum or that they're being naughty, but it's really not that they're being naughty; it's that they're having a hard time coping. So can you tell a little bit for the audience that is watching this that may not really know that difference, why it's different, that why people with autism might be having, behaviors that look like you said, you said that therapist that didn't understand your brother, that they just kind of treated him as a kid who was doing something wrong and knew it when he wasn't really doing that. He just was having a hard time coping.
It feels like overload, different, but tantrums, pretty much a tantrum is them wanting their way and they need their way now. And usually with tantrums, they have a clear way of defining what it is they're trying to get, or they're angry that they're not getting such a thing. Well, as meltdown, there may be some being for coping or they want something. However, it is the hopelessness that they're never going to get it, or pretty much it feels overwhelming that they feel like it's a lifeline, or pretty much that all the stimulation is too much and it feels out of control and they don't feel focused. They don't feel centered at all. They feel like their whole world is moving around and they can't find a steady place to stand. So meltdowns need more care and more compassion than tantrums.